Hello and welcome back to the drag and drop inventory tutorial for Ren'Py part 3, and let's just jump straight back into it, shall we? In the last part of the tutorial, we had just started to create this addToInventory function where we are creating the sprites for the items that the user is adding to their inventory. In this part of the tutorial, we are going to continue on this function by first creating a new function which is going to position each of these sprites on the x-axis. In this function, we are going to call from different parts of our script in order to make sure that there are never any gaps between inventory items, such as when an item is removed, and to make sure that when new items are added, they're added in the right slot. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to call this function Reposition inventory items, like so. And then before we go ahead and create this function, we are going to make sure that we are redrawing the inventory sprite manager as well as restarting the screen, and that is to make sure that the changes that we are making to these items are properly reflected onto the screen. So we're going to say inventory sm.redraw, and then we're going to pass the value 0 as a parameter to the redraw function, and then we're going to say Ren'Py.restart interaction, like so. And I will leave a link to the documentation page of Ren'Py's website into the description box below, where you can read more about this method. But in essence, what this method does is that it will restart the current interaction, and in doing so it also refreshes the screens that we have added to our script. And this is good for cases such as this, where we are making changes to the sprites inside of the sprite manager objects inside of Python code, and the current interaction inside of the Ren'Py script is still ongoing. Because when we have an interaction that is still going and we want to make changes to a sprite manager object, these changes are not going to be reflected on the screen. So by forcing Ren'Py to restart the interaction, we are making sure that these changes are actually being accounted for. Now let's actually go down into the inventory screen real quick and add this inventory sprite manager to it so that we can actually see the items being added to it. So we're going to say add inventory sm, like so. And now we're actually going to go ahead and create this reposition inventory items function. So we're going to scroll back up, and we can create this one above the addToInventory function. So we'll create a few empty lines, and then we'll make sure that we are in the correct indentation, like so. And then we're going to say def reposition inventory items, like so. Now inside of this function, we're going to create a for loop which is going to iterate through each of the items inside of the inventory sprites list, and then we're going to position those sprites on the x-axis. So we're going to say for item in inventory sprites, and then we're going to enumerate this inventory sprites list so that we can get an index value that we can use inside of this for loop. So we're going to use the enumerate function for this. So we're going to say enumerate, and then we're going to add 2 brackets around this inventory sprites list, like so. And then we're going to add the index variable in front of this item, like so. And then inside of this for loop, we're going to say if I is equal to 0. So here we are checking if the current iteration of this for loop is the first one. Then we're going to make sure that the first inventory item in the list is in the first slot inside of the inventory. So to do that, we're going to say item.x is equal to, and then we're going to use the global variable that we created earlier on that holds the first inventory slot position on the screen. So we're going to say inventory first slot x, like so. And then we're going to create an else statement. So we're going to say else. So if this is not the first iteration of this for loop, then it can be any other iteration, such as the second or the third or the fourth. And in such a case, we're going to position the item based on a calculation. And it is going to look like this. Item.x is equal to 2 brackets inventory first slot x plus inventory slot size, and we want the width value from this tuple, so we're going to add 2 square brackets, and then we're going to add a 0 instead of that to grab the first value, and then we're going to say times I, and then outside of these 2 brackets we're going to say plus another set of brackets, inventory slot padding times I. So how does this calculation actually work? Well, first of all, we have determined that this cannot be the first iteration of the for loop, and that means that it could be either the second, third, fourth, and so on, depending on how many items we have in the inventory sprites list. So let's say that this is the second iteration of the for loop, and we want therefore to place our second item in the inventory sprites list. So in that case, we're placing the item on the X position of the first inventory slots X position plus an inventory slots width, and then we're multiplying that by I, and the I variable is going to be, in this case, 1, because we have iterated 2 times through the for loop. So this calculation here is going to give us the second slot of the inventory. And then we also have this section here, which calculates the right amount of padding to add to this item's X position. So by adding this calculation to the other one, we are going to get the second inventory slot, but with an extra padding in between. So now that we have that done, we're going to go ahead and create a new attribute for these inventory sprites, which we are going to call original X. And this is going to contain the original X position for these sprites. And we're actually going to go ahead and create this attribute down here in the addToInventory function. So I'm going to duplicate this line here, and then I'm going to rename this to original X, and we're going to set it to 0 inside of here, but then we're going to go ahead and add the correct value inside of the Reposition inventory items function. So let's go into the first if statement here, and then I'm going to paste this line here, which has this new attribute, and then we're going to say is equal to item.x, and then we're going to do the same thing down here. So we're going to say is equal to item.x, like so. So now that we have done that, we're going to go ahead and save our changes and then launch the game to see how this looks like. So now that we have the game up and running, let's go ahead and click on this key item to see if it will be added into the inventory. But first we're going to go ahead and open it up so that we can see it, and then I'm going to try and click on this to see what happens. And as we can see, it worked indeed, as we got the key item in the first slot of our inventory. So now let's go ahead and do the same thing for the other items, and let's also make sure that the items in the environment is removed when we're adding it to the inventory. The next thing we're going to do is to make sure that we are scrolling back down into our addToInventory function. And in here, we're actually first going to create a new attribute for the inventory sprites. And this attribute we're going to call state, and it is going to contain the state of the item that it is currently in. For this tutorial, we only have one item that can be in 2 different states, and that is the lantern, which can be unlit or lit. And so this attribute is going to help us to keep a track of its current state. But for the other items, we are also going to create this attribute in case you will need it in your specific game. So we're going to create a few empty lines underneath here, like so, and then we're going to say if item is equal to lantern, then we're going to say inventory sprites at the index of -1 dot state is equal to unlit, like so. And then we're going to create an else statement. So we're going to say else, and then we can copy paste this like so. So if this is not the lantern item but any of the other items, then we're just going to set this state to default. So in your game you may have several items that you want to have different states for, and in such a case you're just going to create more if statements that is going to check if the current item in the for loop is of a certain type of item, and if it is, then you can go ahead and add a state for that item. So the next thing we're going to do is to make sure that we are removing the corresponding environment item from the scene. And to do that, we're going to create a few empty lines underneath here. And then we're going to say for env item, which stands for environment item, in environment sprites. So we're going to iterate through each of the items inside of the environment sprites, and then we're going to check if the current environment item in this for loop is the same type as the item inside of this for loop. So we're going to say if env item dot type is equal to item. So if they are the same type, then we want to go ahead and remove this environment item from the scene. And to do that, we're actually going to create another function which is going to be called every time we need to remove an item from the environment. So we're going to call this function remove environment item, like so. And the parameter we want to send in for this function is going to be one that says what item we want to have removed. So we're going to say item is equal to item. And then we're going to go ahead and break this for loop since we found the correct item and removed it from the environment. So we're going to say break, like so. Now let's go back up into the environment events function. And in here, we're going to add some of the other items that we can click on in order to add them to the inventory or interact with in some other way. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say elif item dot type is equal to lantern, and if it is, then we can go ahead and add it into the inventory. So we're going to say add to inventory, and then we're going to pass in a list again as the parameter, and this one is going to contain the value of lantern, like so. And then we can go ahead and add the next one. So I'm going to duplicate this section, like so. And then I'm going to check if the current item type is box. So if it is the box that the user just clicked on, then we don't want to actually add it to the inventory, but rather we want to say something to the user, such as this box is locked, it seems to need a key, or something to that fashion. So we're going to remove this add to inventory function call, and instead we're going to create a new function which we are going to use whenever we want a character to say something, and we're going to call this function character say, and we're going to send in two parameters to this function. One is going to contain the name of the character that is saying something, and the other is going to contain what this character is saying. So we're going to say who is equal to, and in this case I'm going to call my character Claire, so I'm going to say two quotation marks and then Claire, like so. And then I'm going to say what is equal to, and what we want her to say is going to be this box is locked, I think it needs a key, like so. And then we'll do the next one, which is going to be the door vines. So I'm going to duplicate this section, like so. And then we'll say door vines, like so. And then we're going to have Claire say something else. So let's go with I can't open the door. There's some tough vines in the way, like so. So now we can go ahead and create this character say function. So we're going to create a few empty lines underneath here, and then we're going to make sure that we are in the correct indentation, like so. And then we're going to say def character say, and then we're going to add our two arguments, which we have called who and what, like so. Inside of this function, we're going to make a call to a custom say screen, which we haven't created yet. But in order to do that, we're going to have to determine whether or not we are calling this character say function from a Python function or from a label, for example. And then once we can make that distinction, then we can go ahead and choose whether or not we want to call the screen or show the screen. And the reason for that is, if we're trying to call a screen from within a Python function, such as the one that we have up here, we're going to get an error inside of our game, which is going to say that we can't start a new interaction while another one is still going. But if we instead choose to show a screen, we're not going to get that error. So if we're inside of a label, we want to make sure that we're actually calling our custom say screen in order for the advancing functionality of our dialog to be working correctly. And this is going to become a little bit more clear later on once we have created our custom say screen. So for now, in order to make a distinction between if we are calling the character say function from Python code or from a label, we're going to wrap the what parameters value in a list. And this is also going to be helpful in case we want to say several things after each other instead of just one thing, as we can add several items into a list. So we're going to go ahead and wrap this into square brackets, like so, and then we're going to do the same thing up here, like so. And now we can go back down into the character say function, and in here we're going to check what the object type is for the what parameter. And to do that, we're going to use a Python built-in function called isInstance. So to do that, we're going to say if isInstance. And this function takes two parameters. One is the object that we want to check, and the other is the type of object that we want to check for. So we're going to say what as the object that we want to check, and then str, which is the object type that we want to check for. And then inside of this, we're going to say Ren'Py.call screen, and then inside of here, we're going to say character say, which is what we are going to call our custom say screen. Now, because this call screen function also takes parameters, we can go ahead and pass in our who and what parameters from the character say function. So we're going to create a comma after here, and then we're going to say who is equal to who and what is equal to what, like so. So now that we have done that, we are going to go ahead and create another if statement, which is going to check if the what parameter holds a list object type instead of a string. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say elif is instance what and list, like so. So if the what parameter holds a list object instead of a string, then we want to make sure that we are showing the screen instead of calling it. But because this show screen function is not able to take parameters, we are not able to tell it what the text is that it should show as a dialog. So in order to fix that, we're going to need to create a new global variable, which is going to contain a dictionary with two items, which is going to be the character's name as well as what the character is saying. So we're going to scroll back down into the start label, and in here we're going to create this new variable. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to call this variable dialog, and then we're going to say is equal to two curly brackets, like so. And then we're going to scroll back up into the character say function, and inside of here we're going to make sure that we are filling the dialog dictionary with the character's name who is saying something as well as what they are saying. And to do that, we are first of all going to need to make the dialog variable into a global. So we're going to say global dialog, and then we're going to say dialog is equal to two curly brackets, and then inside of here we're going to add the first item, which is going to contain the character's name. So we're going to say who, like so, and then the value for this key is going to be who, which is the parameter which holds the character's name, and then the next item is going to hold the dialog which this character is saying. So we're going to say what, and then what, like so. So now this value for this item is going to contain the what list. And next we're going to make sure that we are showing the screen. So we're going to say Ren'Py.show screen and character say, like so. Now for the screen to actually be able to be shown, we also need to make sure that we are restarting the interaction. So underneath this we are going to say Ren'Py.restart interaction, like so. And now we can go ahead and create this character say screen. So we're going to scroll down until we find a good place to add this, such as here. And then we're going to create the new screen. So we're going to say screen character say, and then we need to make sure that we are adding the two arguments to this screen, which is who and what. So we're going to say who and what, like so. But since this character say screen can also be shown without specifying the who and what parameters, such as in the case when we are showing the screen instead of calling it, we are going to make sure that we are adding default values so that when we are launching the game later on, we won't get any errors saying that we haven't supplied any parameters to this screen even though it takes two. So we're going to say who is equal to none and what is equal to none, like so. So now these none values is going to be the default values in case we are not providing our own values to this screen. Next, we're going to make sure that this screen is a modal screen. So we're going to say modal true, and this is going to help us to prevent any interactions from happening underneath the dialog while it's still showing. And then we're going to set this screen's set order to 6. So we're going to say set order 6, like so. And now we can go ahead and add the actual content for the screen. And to do that, we can actually go into the screens file and copy the default say screens content and paste it in here and then customize it. So we're going to go ahead and open up this screens file. And inside of here, we are first going to press Ctrl F on a keyboard to open up the find functionality of the Atom editor. And inside of this field, we're going to search for the say screen. So we're going to say screen say, and then I'm going to press the enter key. And as we can see, we have now found the say screen. So I'm going to go ahead and copy paste this section right here into our custom say screen in our script, like so. And then now we can close this screens file as well as this search functionality. Now for customization of this screen, you can of course make it look however you want it to, but for this tutorial I'm going to keep it simple, and I'm going to first delete this if who is not none statement, like so, and then I'm going to make sure that this section is indented correctly. And then now for this who text, which displays the character's name, we are going to first want to check if the who parameter is not none, and if it's not, then we can go ahead and use this text. But if it is none, then that means that we've added the character's name into the dialog dictionary, and so we want to grab the character's name from that instead. So we're going to say if who is not none, like so, and then we're going to indent this piece of text, like so, and then after that we're going to say else text dialog. And then we're going to grab the character's name from the dialog dictionary, and to do that we're going to say who to refer to the who key. And then we're going to do the same thing for this what text. So we're going to say if what is not none, and then we'll indent this. And then after that we're going to say else text dialog, and then we're going to grab the what value from the dialog, so we're going to refer to the what key. Now to actually get the dialog that we want to display instead of this text displayable, we're going to need to access an item inside of the what list paired together with this what key. So to do that, we are going to refer to the first item in that list. So we're going to say 2 square brackets after the first 2 brackets, like so. And then we're going to add the value 0 instead of that. So now we're grabbing the first item instead of the what list instead of the dialog dictionary. And now we're also going to need a way to allow the user to progress through the dialog by clicking on the screen. And this is going to be done in different ways depending on how we're showing this screen. So let's say we have a label, for example, and we want 2 dialogues to show one after the other, and we want to progress through them by clicking with the mouse. In such a case, we're going to call the character say Python function twice in a row and supply the what parameter the dialog that we want to say. And then inside of this character say screen, we're going to make sure that when the user clicks with their mouse, the dialog screen is hidden, and then we're going to return back to the label, which is going to handle the next line of script, which is going to display the next piece of dialog. But if we are showing this screen from another Python function, then this dialog dictionary is going to be filled with the character's name as well as the what list. And in such a case, in order to progress to this dialog, we are going to make sure that when the user clicks with their mouse, we are going to remove the first item instead of the what list, so that the next item in the list is going to be the first one. And then we're not going to hide the screen, but instead we're going to leave it up, which is going to cause the dialog to update itself with the new first item instead of the what list. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we're going to create a few empty lines, and then we're going to make sure that we are in the correct indentation, like so. And for this functionality, we're going to create a button which is going to fill up the entire screen. So we're going to say button, and then we're going to make sure that the xfill and yfill properties are set to true. So we're going to say xfill true and yfill true, like so. And now we're going to give this button an action. So to do that, we're going to say if what is none. So if we have not supplied a value to the what parameter, then that means that we are showing this screen from a Python function, and all of the necessary dialog information has been stored inside of the dialog dictionary. And in such a case, we want to make sure that we are checking if the what list inside of the dialog dictionary has more than one item in it, and if it does, we can go ahead and remove the first item in that list in order to make the second item the first one instead. And in doing so, this text displayable right here is going to update with the new dialog. But if this what list only has one item in it, then we don't want to remove the first item in the list since it's the only item, but instead we want to make sure that we are hiding the character say screen completely and then resetting the dialog dictionary. So to do that, we are going to say action, and then we're going to use the Ren'Py function called if. And inside of here, we're going to add a condition which we want to check for. And that condition is going to be len. And inside of this len function, we're going to say dialog what, like so. And then is more than one, like so. So here we're checking if the what list inside of the dialog dictionary has more than one item in it. And if that is true, then we're going to say comma true is equal to. So now we want to remove the first item inside of that list, and to do that we're going to use the Ren'Py function called remove from set. So we're going to say remove from set, like so. And then the first parameter that goes inside of this function is going to be the list that we want to remove something from. So we're going to say dialog what to get the what list, and then after that we're going to say comma and then add the index position of the value that we want to remove, and that is going to be the first item, so we're going to add 0 as the value. And then after that we're going to move one step to the right, like so, and then we're going to add a comma, and we're going to say what we want to do if this condition is false. So we're going to say false is equal to. In this case, since the what list only has one item in it, we want to make sure that we are simply hiding the screen, and then we want to reset the dialog dictionary. So in order to add 2 actions for this button, we are going to create a new list by adding 2 square brackets, like so. And then we're going to supply all of the actions that we want for this button inside of this list. So the first action that we are going to give it is going to be hide, and then we're going to say character say, like so. And then the second action that we want to give this button is going to be set variable. So with this set variable function, we want to make sure that we are resetting the dialog dictionary to a new fresh dictionary. So we're going to first name the dictionary that we want to change. So we're going to add 2 quotation marks, like so. And then we're going to say dialog. And then after that, we're going to create a comma and then supply the value that we want this dialog to contain, which is going to be an empty dictionary. So we're going to create 2 curly brackets, like so. So now the next thing we're going to do is to add an else statement. So we're going to say else. So if the what parameter is not none, then that means that we are showing this character say screen from a label. And in such a case, then we want the action for this button to simply return the control to that label. So for that, we're going to say action return, and then we're going to pass the value true instead of that, like so. Now before we go ahead and launch the game to see what this looks like, I'm going to go ahead and style the displayables inside of this screen a little bit more to make it look more correct. So for this first window here, I'm going to add a padding of 20 pixels all around. So I'm going to say padding and 20 and 20, like so. And then for this what text down here, I'm going to position it inside of this window. So I'm going to say xpos 0.25 and ypos 0.4, like so. And then I'm going to give it an x anchor property. So I'm going to say x anchor, and that should be 0.0, like so. And then we can go ahead and copy this, like so, and then paste it underneath here, like so. So now let's go ahead and save our changes and launch the game to see how this works. So now that we are inside of the game again, we're going to go ahead and check if our dialog is working correctly by either clicking on these door vents or on this box right here. So let's go ahead and try that now. And as we can see, this does indeed seem to work, as we're getting the dialog box to show at the bottom of the screen with the character's name right here, as well as what they are saying down here. And now if we were to move the mouse over any of the other items in the scene, such as this key or this lantern, we can tell that nothing is really happening, and that is because we have made our say screen into a modal, which means that any interactions that happens underneath it is going to be blocked. So now if we were to click with the mouse, we can tell that the dialog box went away because we only had one piece of dialog that we wanted to show on the screen. And then let's go ahead and test clicking on these door vents. And as we can see, the dialog is working here as well. And now we're going to pause this video right here and continue in the next part, where we're going to allow an inventory item to be inspected as well as dragged around on the screen. So I thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.